I'm movie man Eric Houston, and I'm pleased to present the first in our series looking back at the vital industrial and educational film shorts of yesteryear. We begin with Everyday Courtesy from Coronet Instructional Films, 1948. Ostensibly a movie about manners, there are long diversions into admin, as we spend less time with please and thank you than we do with how to properly stage and draw an amateur poster. Fans of educational films may recognize John Lindsay, the star of Dating Do's and Don'ts, as our lead mannerphile. Now sit back, relax, and have a firm handshake ready for Everyday Courtesy.
We are visiting room 10 to see an exhibit on courtesy. May I present Mrs. Anderson and her son Bill, who is in the class. They too have come to watch to see if the people actually display courtesy. Watch how Pete and Marion act as host and hostess. They know that courtesy means showing respect, thinking of the other person, real friendliness. When Pete mentions the neat job Bill did on the exhibit, Bill is pleased. That's courtesy at work. You can see, too, that everyone in the class must have done a great deal of thinking about courtesy and much work to prepare these posters and the rest of the exhibit. Bill is especially proud of his part in the exhibit. The artwork on this large poster, ways to show that we are thinking of other people. We help to make our meetings with other people courteous by using such words as please. Whenever we ask for anything, it shows our friendliness and courtesy if we ask with please. On the other hand, thank you is a simple way to repay those who do things for you. Another expression we need all the time is excuse me. It lets other people know that you are thinking of them when you say excuse me. Still, another way to smooth your meetings with other people is may I. If you must interrupt, 2 words will show that you mean well. Simply, may I? Notice how pleasant and thoughtful Mrs. Anderson is as she expresses interest in Bill's ideas on the poster. Bill graciously shares the credit with his classmates. It was a joint project, he explains, during their study of courtesy. While Pete and Marion posed, Bill sketched the action.
Please.
With that sketch finished, ready for final artwork, Pete got ready to play the guest for the next pose. Marion was the hostess, offering him a cookie.
Thank you.
Pete showed that he appreciated her kindness. For the next demonstration, they needed another chair to make a sofa, and they needed a telephone. Joan played the other girl in conversation with Marion. Marion had to interrupt to answer the phone.
Please excuse me.
She was pleasant and courteous as she excused herself. In the next pose, Marion had something important to say, or else she wouldn't have interrupted.
May I?
Marion is considerate of her friends. Besides these examples of courtesy, there are others. For instance, Mrs. Anderson's way of constructive suggestion. And notice how Bill begins his reply.
It's really quite good, Bill. But don't you think these courteous ways can be used in more than just these 4 situations?
Oh, yes, you're right, Mother. That's why we put the captions on the poster. We need them all the time.
Yes, we do need these simple expressions all the time to show that we are thinking of the other person. On the table is a scrapbook, especially prepared for the exhibit. It also showed consideration of the other person. The exact form of an invitation letter may vary, but this is an example.
Dear parents, an exhibit of our schoolwork and courtesy will be held in room 10 of the Sunnyside School on May 29th from 7:30 to 9 p.m. We hope you can come. Your friends, the class of room 10.
Notice the details about place, date, and time, as well as a few words of cordial invitation. This type of invitation needs no acceptance, but the class prepared an example of one for their scrapbook.
Dear friends, we thank you very much for the invitation to your exhibit in room 10 of the Sunnyside School on May 29 from 7:30 to 9 p.m. We shall be pleased to see your work on courtesy. Sincerely yours, your parents.
A letter of acceptance shows all the same details to be sure they are correct. There is also a sample letter of regret stating why the person could not accept. On the next few pages of the scrapbook are drawings and poems Pete had made about courtesy when using the telephone. Answer promptly. Don't keep the other person waiting. Friendliness is one of the main parts of courtesy. It saves time and makes your conversation more pleasant if you speak distinctly. It's courteous to be brief. Someone else may want to use the telephone. So much for the scrapbook. Over here is a poster that another student made. Be a good listener. It pleases the speaker to know you are really interested in him. And then, too, you can learn much by listening carefully. Mrs. Anderson is being a good listener now, isn't she? And then there's the matter of introductions. How will Bill introduce his mother and his teacher?
Mother, may I present Miss Barton, our teacher?
See how Bill shows respect to his mother by mentioning her first. Because she is the older woman, he presents Miss Barton to her. And he helps their conversation get started by explaining who Miss Barton is.
It's so nice to meet you, Mrs. Anderson.
Bill has told me how much he enjoys your class. He's learned so much about courtesy. How did you teach him to make such a polite introduction?
Perhaps Bill should explain that, Mrs. Anderson.
Well, in our practice in class, we learned that introducing people was just a matter of showing respect. Marion, I'd like to introduce my friend Pete.
Bill mentioned the girl's name first and showed respect by presenting the boy to her. You can mention either name first with two boys of the same age.
Bill, this is Pete. Pete Dalton, Bill Anderson.
How do you do, Bill? Hello, Pete.
So the poster that grew out of this practice is included in the exhibit. And that's how the class learned that introductions are really easy. Just remember to show respect. Besides showing respect, your introductions can help the conversation to begin. Notice how Bill's mother introduces her friends, Mr. and Mrs. Hall.
Mrs. Hall, this is Miss Barton, the teacher in this room. Mrs. Hall is Joan Hall's mother.
Miss Barton, as hostess, offers her hand. Next, Mr. Hall is presented to Miss Barton. And finally, Bill is presented to Mr. and Mrs. Hall. Remember the order? There's a technique to shaking hands. No one likes to have his hand crushed by a bear, nor to clasp one like this, sometimes referred to as dead fish. And so the introductions have been completed, and the group settles down to friendly conversation. Well, it's time to go now. What have you seen here? That is, what have you seen besides the posters and scrapbooks of the exhibit? As you watch the host and hostess, their pleasant manner standing at the door to thank their guests for coming, as you see the guests reply graciously, you realize that it's the simple things, being friendly, thinking of the other person, and showing respect that make up everyday courtesy. Real living courtesy has made the evening a pleasure and a success.
Well, I've got to tell you, I'm not sure about a pleasure and success. I mean, I thought I was courteous, but I was completely unaware of the rigid and unforgiving discipline I need to be truly courteous, particularly with introductions. I introduced an older woman to a young man the other day, and I'm only now realizing the foot I put in my mouth. Now, may I introduce to you, the audience, another etiquette-laden film from Coronet, this time from 1949. It's Let's Play Fair. Did I do that right?
This is a story about a chemistry that Herb bought for himself. His brother Billy. Let's all watch Billy and Herb and the chemistry set, and perhaps we'll learn some things about fair play. As you see this story, we want you to think about questions. Questions such as, what is fair play? Perhaps when the story is over, you'll want to talk about the... Now let's see what Herb's doing. He starts with two clear legs. It would be fun to do experiments like that, but Herb isn't going to let Billy try. Billy wants his dad to make Herb let him do it. He says Herb's not fair. And Dad thinks perhaps he'd better explain to Billy. Herb shares most of his things with Billy, but maybe it is fair for Herb to keep his own chemistry set and not let Billy play with it. After all, Billy is rather young, and he doesn't know how to use the chemistry things safely. He might break something or hurt himself. And Herb earned the set for himself, so he has a right to it. Do you think that's fair? What about it? To play fair, should Herb share the chemistry set? Well, Herb didn't share the set. He used it alone all evening. On Saturday morning, the boys usually help by doing the dishes, but what's this tug of war? It seems they want to dry them because neither wants to wash. Well, whose turn is it to wash the dishes? Herb's turn. Billy's turn. Taking turns is always fair, but here's another question to think about. How can Herb and Billy decide whose turn it is? Mother thinks it's fair to make a rule and follow it. She'll mark the turns on the calendar. Herb is older, so he will wash today while Billy dries, and next time it will be Billy's turn to wash the dishes. So Herb and Billy can play fair by taking turns and by obeying the rules. That's one way to play fair. Oh, Herb's cut his hand. Must have been on a sharp knife in the sink. Mother will have to clean the cut. And Billy has an idea. How about a bandage to keep the dirt out of the cut? Another way to play fair is to be helpful. Well, Billy has the bandages from the bathroom now, and... Herb's chemistry set. Herb said not to touch it, but... Oh, he's downstairs. He'll never find out. What do you think? Should Billy use Herb's chemistry set? Remember your answer to that question. Well, let's see how Billy makes out. My, those things look strange to Billy. Well, try this one. There. There. Now. Oh! No, Billy isn't hurt. Just stained with harmless chemical ink. But Herb's chemistry set. Ooh, Herb's waiting for the bandages. Here they are, to fix Herb's hand. But what about Billy's stained hand? Well, a little bandage like this will keep dirt out of Herb's cut. Herb's all right now. But Billy offers to wash and dry the dishes, to do both. Herb thinks he could help. But don't you suppose Billy sort of wants to do something for Herb, to make up for the chemistry accident? Herb says, all right, it's a good chance to work with the chemistry set. Uh-oh. Herb will find out about the broken test tube. But Mother thinks the cut heals a bit, and she goes back to finish her work. Now Herb remembers that it's time for Billy's favorite program, and he offers to get the station for Billy. After all, Herb wants to play fair.
I noticed today that...
With lots of fresh milk and fruit, so you'll grow big and strong. And now, back to the adventures of Mary and Eddie. When we last saw our young friends, the captain had just landed their rocket plane on the surface of the moon. But Billy isn't really listening to the radio, is he? He has too much to think about. Herb has been playing fair with Billy, and Billy ought to play fair, too. He ought to tell Herb about the chemistry set. And that won't be easy. Besides, maybe Billy ought to buy a new test tube for Herb. But Billy has only a little money saved. He'd been planning to buy some marbles, and if he buys the test tube for Herb, he won't have enough left to buy his marbles. What should Billy do? To play fair, should Billy buy the marbles or the test tube? Well, Billy decides he will play fair. And after he tells Herb, Billy will go up and clean up the mess he's left in Herb's room. So Billy buys a new test tube, and there's Herb's chemistry set, just as good as new. Herb is pleased that Billy played fair. Of course, Billy will have to wait for his new marbles, but he feels better this way. And do you know what Herb decides? He's going to let Billy use the chemistry set some of the time, and he'll teach Billy how to do it safely. That is, if Father and Mother agree. Why, of course, they're glad that Herb and Billy have learned to play fair. Herb and Billy are glad, too. And what have we learned about fair play? To play fair, when should we share things? How do we decide whose turn it is? Should we respect the property of other people? What should we do to make up for our mistakes? What is fair play?
Gosh, the 40s sure seemed like a time of unrelenting administration. When I get home tonight, I'm going to insist to my wife that we mark the washing up schedule on the calendar. Of course, that was another film from Coronet Instructional Films, and we'll be seeing lots from them on this show. Coronet was a sister company to Coronet Magazine, a monthly digest that ran from 1936 to 1971, and was itself a sister publication of Esquire. I, for one, can't even imagine what these films would be like if they'd been released under the Esquire banner, but it'll sure be fun to try. That's all for tonight. We'll be back with more vintage industrial and educational films. Until then, stay safe, watch movies.